with people had all these scatological jokes because, Shakespeare or whatnot, because that was just a big part of life. It wasn't as hidden. We weren't flushing it down the river, as it were. It was something that we had to deal with much more in our day-to-day life, hopefully in, compostable permaculture ways. So.
Right. I love that. So, yeah, ladies and gentlemen and everyone else, welcome. Without further ado, I want to introduce here, Wake the Farm Up. We got Yogi Hale Hendlin, PhD. He's got a real PhD. I talk about my PhD, my post-hole digger, but, we'll get into this, an environmental philosopher and public health scientist. He's in the Netherlands. Check him out in the show footnotes. We got yogihendlin.com. He's a professor at Erasmus School of Philosophy. He's on the faculty for the Dynamics of Inclusive Prosperity Initiative. He's a research associate with the Environmental Health Initiative, advisor for Illusionary. He's the editor-in-chief for Biosemiotics, a journal focused on the study of signs, communication, interpretation, and cognition in living organisms. I love that. He's an affiliate of the International Society of Biosemiotic Studies. He's involved with feral ecologies. There's so much. I'm so curious, and I know that's just probably some of the things he's sharing that he's involved in right now, and there's probably more. So without further ado, let's give a round of applause for Yogi. Come on in. Say hey.
Thanks so much, Andy. Yeah, really happy to be here in conversation with you. Thanks for reaching out.
Yeah, appreciate you. I've enjoyed reading your writings that you can find online in the journal, the Biosemiotics. That's really kind of how I connected in with you. It was the signs and, for... my interest in it, having a deep interest in nature and connecting through permaculture, from connecting with plants through landscaping and ecology studies and foraging, so I'm submerging myself into nature has kind of been my concept for decades, to look at nature in it, not so much so in a petri dish or through a terrarium, separate from it, but to throw myself in it. How does the human exist in this? And along the way, I studied commercial art too, strangely enough. I had encouragement from people to do something besides physical movements. And so I just, I've always been into art. I draw a lot. And so I studied commercial art, which was fascinating. That eventually led me to in the more recent times, really seeing this concept of biosemiotics and the signs, where years ago I didn't have the language to describe how when thistles came into an area, they were telling me something about the soil. And, old-time farmers, they can tell you all about these kinds of little signs and signals from nature, strange folklore, such as here there's one that when the chicory blooms, the squash bugs start showing up. Little whimsical things like that. And to, almost have this Rolodex catalog in my head now. And coming across biosemiosis, honestly, originally from Sue Burke's book, which was a science fiction book that I found one day because I typed in science fiction book written by a botanist, and I wanted to go into some alternate world. I had been spending way too much time studying the real thing, and just sometimes you just gotta go into that imaginary world and explore another place and really see the mystic or magic in the existing now world that's around you. Yeah, I'm saying a lot. Yeah, you got me excited here and sharing some of my background as we're getting to know each other, and that's a big part of this show, being really authentic and maintaining ground, in our conversations and flow. So, yeah, without, going too far into my elf conversation here, they hear from me all the time. We want to hear from Yogi here, so appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you, brother. So this notion of biosemiotics is deeply informed by these, like you said, these removing the third wall, or like the fourth wall in theater, right? Where you have the audience over there. And, with your background in farming, physical hands-on science, you could say, there's this strange gap still between researchers and practitioners, right? And for a long time, I understood the role of researchers to actually be parasitic, because I was working in political science, and, what do political scientists talk and write about? Where do they get their theories from? Actual events that people are doing in the world, whether it's Occupy or whatever it is. It's people doing stuff in the world, acting in concert in ways that are unpredictable, that weren't thought out, that didn't have a game plan beforehand, that just started happening and, galvanizing energy and speed and solidarity. And, I still think, from an agroecological perspective, that you cannot, even with all the theory in the world, you cannot plan political movements. You cannot plan solidarity. You cannot, through theorize what could happen or what needs to happen or all the elements in place, because from an agroecological perspective, the ingredients, the sort of keystone individuals, the sort of serendipities that need to happen for it to take off and then be successful are going to be different in each case. And, unless you have that on the ground knowledge, you're not going to even know what are going to be the salient, topics, the people, the time to act. I've been influenced by, Kepler's laws of motion, right? So you have the Earth going around the sun, or the sun going around, our galaxy, and these orbits that we go in, these sort of spirals that we go in through space, aren't even, right? There's no perfect circles that occur. They're all ellipses, right? So when you have an ellipsis, there's certain times in life where you need to chill, right? It's winter time, so any action is going to be too much action. At other times, you have to stay up all night and pull the all-nighters and make things happen, and that, that notion of temporality, which farming shares with political movements, I think is something that, yes, through generations, and traditions, we can get ideas of, get glimpses of, get hints about it. But really, it's putting yourself in those spaces. There's way too much theorizing about both politics and farming. And really, I think we should leave, a lot of it to the farmers and, the political activists, to make things happen. Because, when people try to control farming, when people try to control political movements, oftentimes you get these Frankenstein results in both.
Yeah. I feel like watching that, in the farm concept, even in my own growth and evolution of things, or adaptations, if you don't like that word, there's this feel of, well, first of all, it's like the farm, the backyard garden is the proving ground for the farm.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to go out onto 300 acres and experiment, but somebody that has a success in their backyard might share that. And then the farm comes in and, kind of how you were mentioning, kind of extracts that idea and then plays it out there. And it's a different situation for sure. And they're going to have a different end result over 100-something years, how they're treating the soil, all the different things. But, it's the concept of farming, even for me, has evolved almost into a word, trying to understand that relationship with the land. It is an extraction. It's like you're trying to create a profit or an income or a surplus that you can trade for. And it creates a certain energy in how you're interacting with the ecosystem. And, from doing farmers markets for 13 years where I'm like picking tomatoes at 5 o'clock in the morning to try to get to a market at 7 so I can pay my mortgage, there's a different energy that I have than since I quit doing the farmers market and have been doing more field ecology kind of work, that the tomato patches almost seem happier to me. And I'm being more patient and just allowing them to grow and ripen in their own time and not coming up and like shedding this energy to them that I want them to be hurrying up because they need to help me pay for my stuff. And there's a fine balance, I guess, in the human existence right now, to lean into that, honestly. But yeah, I think that's this gap, though, between the farm and that backyard garden is huge right now. And, I saw that where the farmers were dumping manure on courthouses and stuff in Europe last year at some point. And from looking at it and what like people were sending me stuff about it because I'm into farm stuff, right? And I saw like a gap in the communication between, in some simple terms, like urban and rural communities, where there was this like strong voice in the urban communities, which was more of like the researchers or the scientists or something that weren't actually doing the farming, but they're saying stuff about how we can grow worms and, produce protein with less water, and that's what we should do. And we're going to make these new environmental laws that make you have to pay higher taxes for doing farming how you used to. But we're not going to take time to teach you, in my book of words, we're not going to take time to teach you permaculture and the solution, like other solutions, like with 200 acres, like you can grow more than just some like wheat or something, you can grow a whole forest. You can
food forests.
I mean, I see like acres put into production for animal feed, and then there'll be like a building with pigs inside of it. But you could have an oak forest where they're just like, moving around in areas, and there's so many different ways to do things.
Aerating the soil, and you don't get like a bunch of manure that you have to deal with. We've created so many of our problems through, what was called the Green Revolution, which started here at Wageningen University in the Netherlands, where they said, okay, we're going to feed the world. And so that's where we got this high input, high output, high, fertilizer and pesticide and standardized model. If you look at New York, which was once New Amsterdam, it's all grids. Now, our farms are all grids. And they're all grids, not because that's how food grows in nature anywhere. It's because that's how machines work. That's the easiest way for a machine to do it. Even for humans, picking in a row, there's nothing especially enlightened or helpful about going down a row. My friends who garden, they oftentimes make mandalas out of their farms. Really beautiful, you plant these the cucumbers near the tomatoes or whatever it is, so that the nutrients are all feeding into each other. They're cascading. And because each plant, of course, has its selective uptake of minerals, like tobacco, for example, one of the plants that I've studied for 20 years.
Okay.
And I have a lot of love for, especially because it's been so abused. Others, it selectively uptakes arsenic in the soil.
Okay.
If your soil is arsenic,
you can clean places with it then.
Exactly. Just like how Paul Stamets talks about with fungal remediation, which they're doing now. I saw with PFAS even. There's I saw press conference recently about using fungal remediation and hemp to clean up PFAS, which is, this endocrine disrupting chemical. Is 7 generations. It gets carried through the bloodlines, and it's really, really toxic. It's what's in Teflon. It's what's in Gore-Tex jackets. But our exposure to it, pretty much every human in the world has it in their blood, and the vast majority of us have it many times higher than any sane allowable limit. There's some places not so far from here in the Netherlands where in, the waterways where kids swim in the summer, it's over 1,000 times the levels. So wow. These are big problems. When we talk about all the polarization that's being manufactured in the world right now over stupid little issues that are really personal choice things for the most part, we are making ourselves as a species and every other species dumber, less apt and able to solve the problems that we need to, because we are flooding ourselves with things that are known toxins that companies like DuPont have, for decades. They knew that it was a reproductive hazard. They took the women off the factory line of PFAS, but still everybody in the community has this in their water, has this in their air, has this in their soil. I mean, they're not even testing the eggs and the milk in the Netherlands because it would be off the charts and the whole industry would collapse. And This is no way to treat, I just taught a class yesterday morning on the philosophy of sustainability, because sustainability is a much abused term that's been bandied about and co-opted by the wrong people. I ask, look, if we really are, religious people, if we really care about the virtues that we say that we do, if we really care about family, are we going to poison ourselves and 7 generations into the future to have less capacity to deal with the problems that we're creating? This to me is, creating hell on earth when we have such beauty, abundance, and bounty at our doorstep, right? And I think any gardener, any farmer who has worked, with the land and woken up early and seen the mist over the field, it's enchanting. And this is where philosophy comes from. This is where, the wonder of creation, to me, is the very substance of our inspiration and the beauty to do the things that we do. To make the commitments, to show up to our families, to our friends, to our community, to our larger group of people who we're responsible with, and to follow through with that. And it's that beauty that I think we need to recapture by giving people the experiences of not being alienated from their food, not being alienated from getting their hands in the soil where they can solve maybe some of their depression or other mental disorders just by sticking your hands in healthy soil and getting all those microbes, that healthy microbiome of healthy soil underneath your fingertips, and literally having those microbes have cascading releases of hormones that can help solve some of our mental health issues.
Wow. That's how I'm holding up so good, huh? So in that, in the biosemiotics of that, there's communication happening. There's the microbials and all the places they've been and the stories and messages, and there's so much in there. I've been playing with calling it biological intelligence, just for my own connection. Maybe there's other terminology that people are using that that I'd be happy to I'm always trying to develop my vocabulary and articulation, because you're talking about communicating with each other about things that are communicating without words. It's
and it's the most immaculate messages that we could ever have, because it's not mediated through symbols. It's not mediated through this infectious disease called symbolic thought, symbolic communication that hit us, a couple tens of thousands of years ago, and became the only way, right? It's almost like it's impossible for us to connect through dance, through song, through silence, because we are no longer used to connecting in those ways. And yet the biological world is always, the chemical world is always connecting with us, and we cannot get rid of that as much as some of us would like to. And so it's like every inhale of breath, that's 50,000 microbes. Every exhale, that's 50,000 microbes. And, during Corona times, people were really worried about that. But what I'm saying is, wait.
Right. It's like, you don't want to shut that down.
If you look at the data, it was air pollution from factories, from industrial production, which was carrying the coronavirus. PM, particle size, PM 2.5 and smaller, was carrying this across long distances. The places that had the worst air pollution had the worst health outcomes. We were concerned about individuals as disease transmitters and had no focus at all about the largest, disease vector, which is industrial culture, which takes as, an imperative that we got to do this thing. And if we create pollution, that's just the price of doing business. So it's like, we weren't looking at that because we were so inured to it, so used to it. And yet, sharing breath, not just with other humans, but with the birds, the trees, the pollen.
Don't go outside.
It's something that, when we talk about autoimmune disorders like Epstein-Barr or something like that, which are huge and on the rise, a lot of that comes from a lack of contact with nature. Your immune system gets much more robust if growing up you had contact with 2 or more animals on a regular basis. Right. If you were raised on a farm, you're not going to have hay fever. You're not going to have a lot of these typical debilitating reactions to the natural world, but also to your own body, right? So it's when we talk about resilience, which is a key concept in permaculture, part of resilience is exposing yourself, like in a hormetic way, in little doses, to various challenges to the body, various stressors, biochemical stressors. And when we have that, it actually makes us stronger, and it makes us be able to say, oh, this is just an incidence of that. It's a token of a type. I don't need to worry about that. I don't need to freak out. The body knows what to do with it. The immune system already can identify it, send white blood cells if necessary to take care of it. We can go about our day. And I think that really that is going to be a new sort of medicine, a new sort of healing that's going to help us out as much as anything else, because right now medicine has this individualistic approach, right? Where I'm going to get your whole genome and then give you tailored, personalized medicine. I'm going to figure out what's going on the inside. Right. But never, almost, do we talk about what's going on the outside.
Wow.
From the skin.
Yep. Isolated petri. You're a petri dish. What's going on in your petri dish? You know what I'm saying?
It's like, well, what's going on in here has a lot to do with what's going on out there. And, the arrogance that we could divorce those two, and that we could bunker ourselves from the consequences of our own decisions, to achieve the things that we want and need, through processes that create waste and pollution as a result. And I'm not going to lie, all of us in our current late industrial culture, we can't take a shit without it hurting someone else, unless you live on a farm and have a dry composting toilet and then you use that as fertilizer. But like, how many of us in an urban setting, and I live in a suburban setting, I have chickens, I live in an eco-village, and still, because it's a fairly conservative eco-village, I'm sure zoning laws would make it impossible to have a dry shitter. Also in the Netherlands, it's just wet all the time. So we'd have to figure something else out. But
Right.
yeah,
right.
you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not saying my shit don't stink. I'm not saying anybody's does. But I'm saying there are better ways that our ancestors and people around the world right now are figuring out, this sort of alternative scientific structures that allow us to find, to the degree that we can, from the level of thought that we, have inherited, more harmonious ways of interfacing with the rest of the natural world.
Well, so me, like, strong interest in food forest gardening for a long time. I do want to come back and ask you about your eco-village and your connection with permaculture and but just like, being in conversation flow here, this like, just how, my shit smells like roses sometimes. I'm a nerd. I like to study my shit, I like to look at it. I like to see my sunflower seeds, like when they come through and be like, oh, look, there they were, like, okay, that only took one day. There's so much, like, there's signs in that you can learn, about your own nature even. Living here, like where I'm at in southern Indiana, the Midwest, we got like amazing bodies of fresh water all around, and growing up in a very environmentally conscious family that always turned the lights out, like that was like our thing, we reused shopping bags before it was a cool thing, you know what I mean? Like recycle, like I remember my parents making sure all the neighbors were trying it out when the barrels were out, the first time. And, it's like we have fresh water. I didn't totally understand like that, like why we were needing to be so conservative with fresh water until I lived in California, where like, like if your spring went dry, you had to move.
Yep.
It's, there's so many different perspectives from living in different places and listening to and hearing about like what it's like living in another place. Like, like I've never been to Netherlands. Like when you describe to me that it's wet, there's some part of my biological intelligence that like kind of like knows that or something, like, yeah, I imagine it, it's like, but it's like in my brain, it's a mixture of an education of biological intelligence and like the zeros and ones of, reading things, seeing pictures, foragers in the Netherlands and what they're harvesting, I'm just interested in stuff, and it's, I'm fascinated by, so like with that flow even, that's a great segue into hearing a little bit about the eco-village and where you live and, what it's like connecting and, your background with permaculture community.
Sure. I was born in Southern California, in a little town in San Diego.
That's funny.
And, growing up, always going to the beach and being able to walk everywhere. And in college at Berkeley, I was in cooperatives. I lived, I joined a frat for like 6 months, and I was like, this isn't really for me because like they have the same like meat and potatoes every, the guys were nice, but like it just was. I felt like it, like there was warmth there, which I genuinely appreciated, but it felt like everybody was trying so hard to impress everybody else that was like taking like at least 30% of the bandwidth. And, the way I have operated in my life is that I require 100% of my bandwidth to just be present as much as possible, because there's a lot of ththings going on and a lot of important things that need to be taken care of. And yes, I want to learn, polite protocols and all that, which is something, as, a rebel in many ways, that's something that is always challenging, how to come into a new situation and to read the room and to be able to find my place without, but also without being unduly disruptive, right? And then also finding those moments when people are inviting some sort of disruption because what's working isn't working anymore, and they need something different. And that's sort of why I'm invited into many spaces and places. And yet the moment change starts to happen organically on its own, people start to backpedal, and once they realize the implications of it, they're like, wait. That means that, power dynamics are going to be sort of negotiated, and, a lot of the sort of unearned entitlements that we've had might come up into question. The Netherlands is famous in its business culture for flat hierarchies, but really it's not a flat hierarchy at all. It's a cryptic hierarchy. It's an obscured hierarchy. So you don't actually know where you are at all with things. So, under the guise of being nice guys. So it's been a funny situation there. But having the experience I lived in a cooperative at UC Berkeley called Lothlorien.
Elf, man. Elf, yeah. Hey, you guys hear that? What?
Yeah. So I'm an elf, whether I like it or not,
I love
right?
That. Fascinating.
Yeah. So I've lived in Germany. I did my PhD in Germany. I've lived in what they call WG, Wohnungsgemeinschaften, which is sort of like, I guess we would call it co-living nowadays. But it's living with other people and figuring it out. And I've lived in many countries, in South America, in Europe, and I've spent, I don't know, more than 15 years of my life, in other countries. I speak German, Spanish, Portuguese, and I can understand and speak some Netherlands, or some Dutch, Nederland. But coming here, during the pandemic, we lived in Rotterdam, my family, and they were selling the house we lived in. And so we had to figure something out. We moved to Berlin. Some Japanese friends of ours had a sweet apartment. I love Berlin. I lived there for 5 years. And so we lived there. But then when I started teaching and had to come back to Rotterdam, it's a long commute on train, 7 hours, from Berlin to Rotterdam. Wow. And so we were looking for, a place to ground and, grow some roots here in Europe. And we found this little town of Zutphen and this little community. And we were so excited to sort of integrate into this lifestyle, which is, it's not the city life that, in my young single years, like I loved, the urban life. I know, right? But it's provides so much solace for me and peace. And so silence and stillness and seeing the stars and being able to hear the rain patter on my, on my roof. Like for me, like this is grace touching me and bringing me back to my heart, bringing me back to what matters. And so we have 50 houses in a circle. So it's like a big circle with like 4 entrances, and 50 houses. And then in the center, we have a community house with sort of like a dance yoga space, a kitchen, meditation room, co-working space, everything. It's super nice.
51
we've got about like 8,000 square meters of land, which I don't know, is about 1.5 acres, something like that.
Okay. 50 houses on 1.5 acres?
No, 50 houses on the outside.
With 1.5 in the center.
And we have our own little gardens. So I have a sauna in my backyard.
That's so cool.
And my chicken.
Wow.
Yeah, it's sweet. And everybody's getting like heat pumps, and like most of my neighbors have solar panels. And so it's like, we're trying to lower our footprint as much as possible. And we're thinking about, okay, can we share a heat pump amongst neighbors and working that stuff out.
I mean, that seems like one of those areas where somewhere you could have a winter compost pile and run water through it and connect it to all the houses really easily.
Oh, totally. Yeah, we do have compost, which is really high quality compost, I must say. We got bees here.
I can imagine with a community like that, you probably have a lot of little micro businesses that are like functioning with the land, and like, so like with that, like sharing land with that many people too, having micro businesses, do you have like community town hall kind of conversations when somebody's like, yeah, I want to put some new bees in this area. Is that cool? And like,
yeah. I mean,
like,
I would say that generally, like, there's, people are open to new initiatives, but I have to say, the people who created this community 30 years ago, most of them stayed. So it's more of an elderly community at this point because of that, because they're like, this is the best retirement ever.
Yeah.
I got all my friends here,
I love hearing
I can take my, we have people in our community in their 90s taking their bike, not an electric bike, just their normal bike to the farmers markets every week, getting their veggies, coming home with their panniers. And I'm like, this is a good way to live one's life. Respect, to my neighbors. So
yeah, I love hearing that.
Yeah. But with permaculture, I mean, for me, to be honest, it's mostly theoretical. I have a garden. I've, done cob building and, had friends who have taught me some. But in terms of actually like day in, day out, like many years being with the same land and seeing like how different experiments work, that's something that I still yearn for.
How
so
long,
that I think will be coming in the next phase.
Yeah, like how long have you gotten to be at this space, that this community that you're living with now?
We've been here 3 years, and so we're starting to see, the trees that we planted bearing fruit, quite literally. So that's really beautiful, that's something, and also for my family, like that's a lesson that you can't teach abstractly, like how long it takes. You plant a seed before it bears fruit, but seeing, oh my gosh, I had totally forgotten about it, and yet here's the apricot, that we get to eat. Yum.
You're gonna I'm excited for you on that, and I'm excited though, and I don't know, I've been like exploring through action and observation and experience and hands-on and philosophically permaculture for decades now. I came across it in the late 90s when I was like a late teenager, and it was really organic. It came to me in a sign. It was at a bulletin board at a natural food store in Australia, and I was like, I need to go to this. Look, these are all the right words.
That was the Bill Mollison variety.
Yeah, it was at a beautiful community there called Crystal Waters. I know they're, well adored in the permaculture community. I had no idea at the time, but it's like how over time I've been trying to address that question. What is permaculture really? Because, since the advent of the internet, there's been a lot more people who are blogging about it who, like you said, haven't had that time period of, being into a situation, or, there's a lot of voices that go into it. So it's like putting it into a box is like limiting, but I've tried to, share with people, like lasagna gardening, it's not permaculture as much so as the color orange isn't, a painting, it's like something on your palette, to work with, to connect with into it, and connect in the understanding of it. I mean, I'll even say, humbly, I appreciate how your writings have helped me articulate and understand some of my experiences. And, one such, on the fruit tree, there's a pawpaw tree. It's a native tree in the eastern hardwood forest here. And I used to drive around foraging and collecting them, and I'd save my favorite ones and plant them in these areas. And, I've learned so much from them, but there's trees. I've been on my homestead going into my 16th season, and there's trees that came from seeds that were in my mouth. And, I walk past them barefoot, like all these different ways I've connected, unintentionally, intentionally, all of it, and I feel that they've tuned into my electrical frequency, and they're not only, it's why a home gardener loves the produce that's coming from their garden. It's because they're touching the soil. There's this whole, you're in the petri dish with that piece of garden, you're connecting into it, and it's like that all guy and body kind of concept, and there's this connection there, and they're generating and creating things to your electrical frequency, knowing that you're a creature that's been interacting in their ecosystem with them in a favorable way. Like I'm spreading, these fruit tree seeds, they have, like, I felt an overwhelming sense of like a love from these trees in a way that, I would normally feel from a human, honestly, but like there's an emotional feeling just like we have for our plants. They're having them for us, and like, creating these things, and they have other feelings too. When I come through and chop a bunch of, some sort of honeysuckle, it's an invasive bush here, and people will pay people to chop it out, and you come through and there's this different feeling. Sometimes they whip you in the face, and like, you're just like, okay, cool. So,
and we've got honeysuckle too here, and while we love it, it goes everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've really, in my own journey, cultivated that connection with invasives and different things and what is, and understand like what's inside of my brain is a new forest, as well as outside of my brain there's a new forest emerging every day. There's new lantern moths here, and there's different things that show up, and there's things to be of concern, even in these like environmental concepts that in the food forest, that there is like this concept of succession, where a grassy field turns into an old growth forest eventually. And the best place for a human habitation is somewhere like in the middle, because that's where there's going to be more edges, where there's grassland species and old growth species, and there's species that are emergent species like showing up and building soil and producing more fruits, and there's more sunlight on the ground, so there's more herbs and different things. So that's, where human activity is normally found. And to maintain that kind of thing, there is like a balance of bringing in some sort of destruction, if that makes sense, some sort of catastrophe, whether it's
fire,
chainsaw cutting, harvesting. I look at it mostly as like, if I try to interact in a harvesting way, whether I'm harvesting to chop and drop and make mulch, or if I'm harvesting to eat and consume or share, or just like, it's a whole dance constantly, like, and I guess the part is like, you can't buy that. You can't buy that experience. You can't click somewhere and then have it delivered to you next week. And that's why it's become very important for me to learn how to articulate that. And I'm going to continue reading and connecting with you. And, I'm going to stop talking right now and give our listeners some more, like, I don't know, like some of them that know me might have enjoyed that. Some of them are probably sitting there going like, all right, Elf, stop talking and let Yogi get back into it. But yeah, those are some thoughts, it's from my connections and journeys and what I'm trying to write and articulate better and understand even better, beyond words. I'm having these communications with different species, and it's fascinating.
Yeah, and I think that a common thread too is the intertwinement of intuition and rationality, because obviously we do things with some sort of idea in mind. You have this notion of succession ecology that is, it comes from science, comes from, environmental sciences. And yet the experience that you get through attending to edges, to playing the edges, to looking at the liminalities of, okay, so I've got this invasive species, like what is my mindset? Am I going to get whipped more by the honeysuckle if I'm harboring sort of anger or hate, rather than just like, I got to do this, like,
it happens every time. Yeah, they whip me more if I'm doing it. Yeah, it's like I try to look at it like I'm harvesting lettuce. You know, when you cut a head of lettuce, you're not like, I hate you, you shouldn't be growing here. And then you cut it or something, you know, you're like, oh, you're so beautiful. Thank you for being in my salad tonight. You know, it's like I try to look at that while I'm chopping them, and then they whip me less. And they end up growing turkey tail mushrooms or something on the ground where I left them, you know? It's so cool.
And those aren't things that necessarily we can know beforehand. And that's why you could say exposure therapy to what it is like to deal with, you know, both your mutualists, your commensalists, and your parasites in your ecosystem, you know, finding symbiosis with all of it, and looking at, you know, I'm very interested at our permaculture of emotions, as we're wrapped up in what we're doing with the outside world. Because I think that, you know, our emotions are the gateway to being able to make different decisions. Historically, you know, Descartes said, okay, so the emotions over here, rationality is over here, and never two shall the twain, you know, twain shall the two meet. And what turns out to be the case, with the work of Antonio Damasio with Descartes' error and many other interesting cognitive science studies, is that emotion and reason are intertwined. They are like mycelium and glucose-feeding bacteria and plants, right? They are all, you can't extricate one from the other. And so for me, there's a really important aspect of cultivation, which includes, you could say, moral or spiritual cultivation through that work, right? And it's not like you do it. It's not like you take care of your land in order to become a better person. But if you go back to Thomas Jefferson and these questions of, you know, agrarian lifestyles and the move to urbanism and factories, there was a very strong moral argument against urbanization and factory, you know, basically taking all the people who are working on the fields and shoving them into factories. Because that was not only a disconnection from the land, but a loss of self, a loss of bearing and orientation. And it's almost like by working the land, you get your North Star of how to deal with difficult situations, how to deal with surprise, how to deal with letdowns and all the rest. And it's
adaptation, you know, you're like having to adapt, you know, like it's why weather is called weather, right? It's like people are always asking me in modern society what I'm going to do next week on Wednesday. And I'm like, well, it depends on the weather.
And that's always how our meaningful events, rituals, and celebrations have been. They haven't been on specific days. They have been, you know, is today the day? Is today the day? Did the groundhog stick his head out? You know,
the wind is coming from the south and it's warm or something. Yeah,
exactly. It's all these signs that together, you know, having the wisest in our communities being able to read them, those who have read them for the longest time. And, you know, Wendell Berry, who I think is one of the great environmental writers of our generation, talks about this. It's a very simple thing that you have to observe. You have to be aware whether you're spinning yourself out when the weather is presenting you with obstacles. And so on the one hand, it precludes us from a sort of, paternalism, helicopter parent, this cloistering of ourselves, you know, like, oh, I want the algorithm not to show me anything I don't want. I'm just going to put on my headphones and my pacifier and watch my Netflix. This retreat from the world. You don't get that when you live in a homestead, when you are farming, when you are out in the elements, when you don't have all of the bubble wrap our current, modern society provides us. You have to find some way internally to work through all of those thoughts, all those emotions, all those physiological sensations, which are causing feedback loops of disruption, of suffering, and you have to make peace ultimately with all of it. You have to harmonize it. You have to work through it and overcome it, not in this grandiose way, but more like, how a river will polish a stone, over the iterations of spending day after day after day after day outside, being cold, being wet, coming in and having a fire and knowing that you're not going to die. Because
it makes when you're out in that ice today, like, not that bad, because you have this like memory that you're going to be able to flow back into a space where there's a fire. But then, something comes up, so you got to be out a little bit longer, so you're pushing yourself again. You're like, okay, but that fire's still there, and you still have to look forward to it. Whatever it is, something to look forward to. Like, yeah, I can't imagine not having like a sauna if I lived in the Netherlands. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's,
it's pretty nice. Yeah. When I feel like, I'm getting sick or I had a super long day, 16 hours, like something, I'm like, all right, like now I get to just shut down all of the attention to the outside world, and I can just receive, be in the womb again. Mm-hmm.
Maybe even you're letting go too. You're just like you're being the river. Yeah.
And so what I'm suggesting is that we need both things. We need the exposure, and we also need the comfort. We need the womb, right? A womb of one's own. And so coming back to these places and spaces where we know that we're going to be fed, clothed, warm, like we're going to be loved up, which also includes community, right? And I think in permaculture, like this is a crucial aspect because, people want to have fun. People want to meet new people. People want to exchange ideas and tips and get second opinions. And also, sometimes you need helping hands. And there's all sorts of sort of oxytocin release. We're talking biochemistry again. Get your
it's
daily,
nature,
get your hugs in. Like we need hugs, either with trees or people. But like, we need like 10 hugs a day to stay happy. Just have a nice baseline level. And
I need at least like 50 fist bumps. Like every time I'm in town somewhere, I'm like, I don't know who you are, but I need a fist bump you. It's like, come on.
Totally. Yeah. And those, like through our acquaintances and these associations are super important. They call them soft ties because it's these sort of like the people who are sort of on our peripheries. But like when we treat it like a transaction, that's when we die inside. That's when we stop being able to be nourished. And it's these little, the fist bumps, like, just chatting somebody about their day, you didn't have to, you didn't need to, but both of you will walk away with improved mood, better brain chemistry, a pep in your step, and it's going to make all the difference. And when that becomes a habit, that's how you create sociality. That's how you create bonds of solidarity. That's how you, create power when, something's going, pear-shaped, as the British say. When an apple goes pear-shaped.
Okay, what's that mean? Like
when shit goes, wrong.
Gotcha.
The apple drops. Like,
okay, it changed. Yeah. Trip. Okay.
When things go pear-shaped, yeah. Then you can draw on these, soft ties, these weak ties, these associations that are just, hey, and be like, hey, man, like there's a meeting tonight. We need like to discuss this because like, hey, we need to make sure that, our soil doesn't get destroyed or whatever it is. And you come together and you talk, and people are more likely, of course, if you've been friendly with them, every time you see them, to be like, all right, I'll give it a check. I'll check it out. And, that's how we build movements.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and you're part of a lot of different movements, that are, I can see, how like
I'm an interloper. I'm a how do you say, opportunistic species that sometimes is there and sometimes like I basically go where I'm called. Whatever that happens to mean and whatever sort of metric, which is changing, happens to be, at the time. I like to support the things that, to me, I feel are noteworthy and making a difference in the world, but are also just fascinating personally to me. Because as Emma Goldman said, if I can't dance, it's not my revolution. So I got to be able to dance wherever I'm at. I want to go not where I'm tolerated, but go where I'm celebrated, which I would hope for all species.
Yeah. I think that, you use the word revolution, and we've been like talking in forums and like galaxies, and, I have friends that are into flat earth theories and stuff, and all the different things. My ears are very open, to the possibilities. Yet, we could be on the back of a giant turtle. Like, either way for me, like, again, my experience hanging out, eating a pawpaw fruit in the back in the forest here, like, doesn't change whether it's flat or round or circular or, egg shaped or, turned into a pear. But, it's like, there's this whole like concept, of revolutions. And I've almost been trying to like, I love the concept and energy that comes behind the word, but I try to remember, 'cause like if I'm in a car, it'll tell you how many revolutions the engine goes. I'm like, dang, this thing's like on fire. It's having this many revolutions per minute. And, it's like, maybe that's what's happening to people too, almost, is this like, we're going in circles. And, there's this different concept, of like, there's like polar energies, of circular energy that goes in revolutions. And then there's, polar of that is like a directional energy, like something that's going in a constant direction, a straight line, and, like those two shapes are zeros and ones, fascinating enough, but when you take those two energies and put them together, they turn into more of the actual shape of what I understand the universe to be in, more spirals and, curved in that, because you're going in a direction, but you're going in a circle, but never back to the same place, always like into this new realm, because you're going out in a directional of some sort, but that's even changing from the rotations. And it's why I like the word evolutionary, like we need an evolutionary moment or something. But I do know that word itself even is like a trigger point that shuts down, half of humanity or some sort, because, they don't believe that, all of a sudden makes them think I'm talking about how we came from like monkeys and trees or something, and like, that's a possible theory, but I'm not attached to that. There's so many thoughts, and like, how do we really balance all of that, and know what really, really is real, like on a philosophical point, there's a lot of mystery to the past just as much as there is to the future. I'm definitely a student of the present moment. So these are the questions I come up with, I guess.
Yeah, I try not. I base a lot of my work in sort of evo-devo biology, so ecological, developmental, evolutionary biology, and the extended evolutionary synthesis, which are you could say, most. They're the most spiral forms of evolutionary theory that I've come across. Now, as for like other debates, I tend to, I don't really care what people believe in one way or another. For me, I care how people treat each other, right?
Love that.
That is the litmus test. And there are so many. I'm an academic, and especially in academia, there's so many partisan debates. Oh, which theories do you believe? Which authors are you on the side of? Like, which hypothesis are you defending? And to me, these are distractions for the most part. Yes, science goes forward through contestation. So it doesn't mean that you don't need to have an opinion or you should be weak about your opinion, but our opinions and our beliefs, hopefully, can be fundamentally open to renegotiation. right? The most valuable thing in my life, I have been able to update, and for me, it feels like an upgrade, a lot of the beliefs that I've previously held. And sometimes it spirals around to the same one I held 30 years ago, but in a completely different way.
Yeah.
I understand it in a different way. And so I'm very concerned about a lot of the, the polarization over things like, I don't know, flat Earth or evolutionary theory or something like that. Because to me, like those, I'm always wondering, why are people investing so much time in a debate over something that really materially makes no difference? It's an abstract concept. It's part of the mind virus that is symbolic culture, divorced from the icons and indexes, if we're talking semiotics, of the world, of materiality, of who we are and how we interact and how we negotiate, how we're going to get along and how to deal with the suffering that we all have. Like all of us are suffering. Like that's pretty clear. And it's also the tenet of almost every religion, is that nobody gets out of here free. My question is, are you using your suffering to create less suffering in the world or to create more? Are you using your suffering, dedicating it for beauty, for elegance, are you letting yourself crumble, acidify, and decay in whatever sense of self you think you have? Are you literally making yourself sacred in the act of suffering, right? That's where it comes from. And so, when I'm talking with my kid and there's part of me that has a lot of resistance, can I be present with that resistance and be like, oh, I'm having a really intense physiological, emotional reaction right now. There's part of me that says, just shut up, and I'm not letting that part dictate my actions. I'm being with it. I'm like, oh, that's very intense right now. That part really wants to just like say, no, this is not important. Shut up. It's, like, wow, that's really intense. And so when I can have, when I can have a little bit of compassion for that part of myself without letting that part of myself dictate my actions, I can be softer, I can be gentler, I can be more patient without denying that part of myself. Because the more I attend to it, the more it feels fed, and the more it doesn't really need to like control the operations and rear its head in the same way that it was before.
Loud. Great.
So it's I think everybody has their own process with it. And again, with permaculture, you couldn't ever say, well, here are the 3 simple steps on how to do that. Everybody discovers their own route to having a little bit of grace with all the intensity that comes up with our suffering. But, for me, I enjoy what, environmental science can help me think about with other things. I don't see science and spirituality or science and religion, academia and religion as necessarily opposing forces. I just taught in one of my courses, E.F. Schumacher's Guide for the Perplexed, where he talks about, this notion of inner knowledge. So connection, we need a science of connecting to ourselves, but not a science that, any outside person can tell us. We also need a science of reconnecting to that which is beyond all of our human, all of our language, all of our human distinctions and categories, and that is a religious process. And he talks very explicitly about the need for religiosity if we're going to get to an ecological future. And I think if you look at Wendell Berry and, Robin Wall Kimmerer, Braiding Sweetgrass, many of these books that and thinkers that have had such an impact on us and a big impact on my life and worldview, they are taking a fundamental perspective that our ways of inquiry and our service towards that which is greater than us, whatever you want to call it, is in harmony with nature, right? And in learning about the more than human world, as David Abram calls it in his great book, The Spell of the Sensuous, we learn about what really is science and what really is religion through that attention, through that action, through falling and getting up, through getting cut and, putting some mud on it and having it come over. Because we, as lofty as we'd like to think we are, our divinity is in the earth. We are humans. We come from humus, right? And connecting with that humus is our birthright, and it's the method of how we get through to those past those barriers of right and wrong, or good and bad, or the mental clutter, the symbolic clutter, which consumes so much of our time and is, for the most part, a huge distraction. And so I'm real simple like that. Even though I spend a lot of my days, in the life of the mind, for me, coming home and hanging out with my chickens and, taking my shoes off, putting my feet on the earth, that helps me do what I do. And if I didn't do those practices, I'd have a breakdown. I would, all the stuff that happens to people, But because for me, cultivating community, cultivating life around me, and also cultivating the life within me, right? Because we can talk about all the permaculture stuff out there, but I'm a sugar addict, right? But I know if I'm starting to get sick or if I have a big week coming up, I abstain because I'm cultivating my brain microbiome, my heart microbiome, and my gut microbiome with, all sorts of herbs. My partner's an herbalist, right? So we wildcraft all the time. And that's a big part of our, you could say, our cosmology. How we see the world is that there are all these, gifts from nature that, we're learning all the time. When we make miso at home, we put our families, all of our hands into the miso. So like you were saying with your trees, getting to know your resonance, the microbes on our skin get into the miso so it can make the enzymes which are conducive to that and conducive for giving us the elements that are missing in our diet, because it will know.
That's such a beautiful ritual too. I love all of that concept, and I love how you guys are doing that. I'm gonna try that. I like to make miso soup.
Yeah, sure. Miso is amazing, and making your own miso with koji is great. We even make it with chickpeas. We make chickpea miso because my partner, she can't have soybeans very easily. She has to be careful with them, and just getting your hands in it, and getting the different members of your household, their hands into it, and then it will produce what is lacking. So that you can be fed, really fed.
That's so beautiful. And funny commentary on soybeans, we talked about how certain plants people were developing more with working with mechanics and putting things in rows, and how that was better for the mechanics and the machines earlier in our conversation, and how a lot of our crops now have been mostly genetically selected for the ease of the machine's harvest as opposed to our health. And I personally think, from observation, I don't know numbers on it, but that's probably something that's contributed to why a lot of people are having allergies to soy and wheat germ and the different things that we're seeing show up. I mean, there's also a lot more people. There's a greater number of, test subjects for these mechanically processed and designed foods to try on people and see what happens, I guess. But yeah, it's
I just, watched this thing that they said, an orange that we would get at the supermarket today has, the amount of nutrients that we would need to get for one orange of, our ancestors 100 years ago, we'd have to eat 8 oranges.
Wow.
And a big part of this is fertilizer. Some of the work I've done, looks at if you use macronutrients, CPK, right, in your fertilizer, calcium, phosphorus, and nitrogen, then it's like giving us junk food. It's like giving us ultra processed food. You give us hamburger and we're not going to want this, a McDonald's hamburger, and we're not going to want a salad. We're not going to want a soup, because we're being filled up with all this fake stuff, right? And the same works with micronutrients. When you give a plant macronutrients, it will not selectively uptake the micronutrients in the soil. So that's one big thing. The other thing is our soil no longer has a lot of these micronutrients because of the way that we've been treating it. And that's why, I think that some very interesting work with getting seaweed and putting that in crops and will be really effective, because the sea has all the micronutrients that we need. They use seaweed for cow farts now, right, to minimize methane by up to 90%.
It makes them have the right amount of nutrients to not process as much gas. Huh.
Yeah, it also has, I think, certain enzymes. There's a certain Hawaiian kombu seaweed that they're using, which is super interesting. I'm like, why not, right? Because meat's probably going to taste better if your cows don't have as much indigestion anyhow. But for our soils, to put, in whatever compost mixes seaweed, we can get certain things that you can't get anywhere else. And if you look at like bears will, get salmon from the river, and then they'll go take it back to their favorite tree and they'll eat it there. And so the guts and the bones of that salmon will go and feed the tree, which, has nuts and gives them what they need. And so they're completing this cycle. And so I'm really curious at like all the cycles that, have been disrupted through this very linear thinking of, means, ends rationality, instrumental rationality of the factory, of, the industrial model, how we can, people talk about the circular economy, and I agree with you. First of all, the circular economy works nowhere and doesn't exist anywhere. But how can we create spiral economies, right? How can we make it so that there is, whatever we're producing is going to become a family heirloom, right? Yeah. Or is going to be packaged in our food packaged in banana leaves, like whatever is local, like, because one, that's way more fun. Two, like, I think that there's a need to look at, like, people talk about microplastics, right? When we wrap our food in plastic, it's not helping us. We basically pooping out a credit card a week, Americans, at this point.
Yeah,
which is great.
Yeah. I have a running joke with that one, about how I found that out. So I just apply for a new credit card every week and just eat it when it arrives and get it done with all at once,
Right. And, I'm always curious. So, the traditional things that we used everywhere in the world for wrapping, whether it was hemp or banana leaves or palm fronds or whatever, what positive enzymes were those contributing to the food that made it easier to digest, all the other things? So it's sort of the opposite of microplastics or nanoplastics. And I think that there needs to be more research in that direction, because, we tend to think, well, it's just convenient, right? And, as so many people say, when you trade convenience for health, you're going to have neither, in the end. Just as, the founding fathers of the U.S. said, when you trade freedom for security, you will end up having neither.
Good.
And so I feel the same.
Good share on that.
Just as much as the next person. But I also love being an ascetic. I love saying, okay, so maybe there's like certain fruits like loquats, right, that they don't sell in stores. There's certain fruits all around the world that grow there, but are never sold in stores because they just go bad the moment you pick them. And I think there's something special about that. For me, these are sometimes some of my favorite fruits. And there's something to that, like you can't capture it. You can't I never see loquat jams or syrups or anything. And I think it's pretty cool.
I mean, I just got to tell you, I live in southern Indiana, right? And they tell me I can't grow loquats, but I had built a greenhouse, passive solar heat my house with, and I have a couple of loquat trees that my niece had started for me years ago, and they make fruit here.
Yeah, and in San Diego, those are prolific, and you just eat them, spit the seeds out, and it's like one of these carnivalesque things.
Being in a greenhouse, they're trees, so they keep growing into the ceiling, but through connecting with the plant, I found out, reading about them, ethnobotanical studies are fascinating to me, that you can eat their leaves and they're actually considered a superfood. They're sold on the internet, dried and powdered like other superfood greens. I'm like, okay, every time it grows to the ceiling, I'm going to cut some of these and dry them, add that into my, food. And I have goats as well. So sometimes I cut those in the winter and can bring them some superfood greens, which they're fresh and alive, and it's a great treat for them amongst, for their health as well. Just, it's amazing how the systems can work together.
And you get those superfoods, pre-digested secondhand then also.
Totally.
Just like getting your Amanita muscaria mushrooms, without the toxins through drinking reindeer piss.
Oh, wow. Tell me more about that. You did
the origins of Santa Claus, but
the origins of Santa Claus were from this
the Sami people, right? With these flying reindeer who are eating, the red mushrooms with the white spots, the Amanita muscaria, fly agaric mushroom, and they would actually drink the reindeer piss because it got rid of the toxins from the mushroom, but still got you high.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I wonder how they first discovered that. That's fascinating.
Well, they've been reindeer herders for many, many thousands of years.
So they've been around reindeer piss. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool.
But they figured out, because, they were eating the mushrooms too, but the reindeer piss absorbs a lot of the toxins, and it's the piss is clean, but it still has the psychoactive component.
Cool. That's fascinating. There's a whole mythos on,
Yeah. Absolutely.
So some of what you're talking about is just recently, or what we've been talking is the inclusive prosperity initiative that you work with, involved in some of these some of your action, I guess you could say, in involvement in what we're talking about.
That initiative looks at basically the Netherlands is a very rich country, and at the beginning you talked about these farmer protests, right, where they were throwing sludge on the Dutch capital, and part of this was because the Dutch government wanted to reduce the excess nitrogen from too much fertilizer and too many cows, basically, their factory farms. But they had to do this. They have to do this anyhow to comply with European Union rules around climate change and everything else. But, they did it very flat-footedly, the government, in the worst way possible. I mean, it's like if you wanted people to get pissed off at you, that's how they did it. And, of course, the agrochemical industry, the Monsanto Bayers, the Syngentas, the Cargills of the world, they also do not have a vested interest in permaculture or agroecology or people having their own sovereignty. They want people to be addicted to their feed, to their pesticides, to their machines. You know, just like John Deere won't let you repair your own stuff. You can go down that rabbit hole. But yeah, a lot of it has to do about money. So a lot of these farmers were misled by these companies, incensed by them. But like you said, you know, how did this come to be? For the last 80 years, post-World War II, Europe and the U.S. and, you know, all the other weird countries, the Western educated, industrialized, rich democracies, you know, were fed, hey, this is how we're going to, you know, don't let any good crisis go to waste, right? Europe was destroyed for the most part. The U.S. had just become, you know, the hero. And instead, the U.S. said, okay, we're going to let our industry basically control the world and dictate how we're going to do things. So we had all these big companies, you know, the biggest companies in Europe and in the U.S., you know, decide farm policy. And so all the small farms, you know, there's this image of the old school Dutch farmer, you know, or the Dutch farmer's wife and daughter or whatever, you know, like these happy images. And I've written about this in Dutch, actually, about sort of the appropriation of this image of the farmer. But most of the small holdings of farmers were bought up, and increasingly you just have these mega farms that are all greenhouses. It even says Monsanto outside of the greenhouses.
Wow.
And that there's a huge wealth disparity. Like something like 20% of the billionaires in the Netherlands have made their money off of agriculture, right?
Wow.
But 30% of all farmers fall below the poverty line. So this is a big problem here, you know, that inequity. And I think a lot of that is what's not being addressed with all this. And, you know, we tend to think about nitrogen, right? It was called the stikstofdebat here, you know, the nitrogen debate. It's not about nitrogen. It's about these unsustainable sort of farming doom loops that a lot of farmers have gotten caught up in. And just like, you know, in the U.S., in sort of, you know, sharecroppers, you have a bad harvest and, you know, you lose your land. That's sort of the precarity of a lot of the farmers here. And this is a problem, especially with climate change. Like, you know, climates are getting more extreme and uncertain. And so, like, if we look at what happened in Spain over the last few years, they had huge droughts and then huge floods, because when the rain finally came, they got a year's worth of rain in a single day. And so the farmers were so perplexed. They had never experienced anything like this on, you know, and so they blamed European like lasers or weather modification. And I guess the justification was just to piss the farmers off or something. Like the motive wasn't clear, but they were so traumatized from these extreme weather events that they were groping for any sort of sense making of why their entire crop was devastated and why they were going to lose so much, and why, you know, you do that enough seasons and there's no more insurance, there's no more social net, and you're just screwed. And so this is something that has not been addressed by, as far as I know, any government sufficiently, of how to help transition people, not just, you know, off of one, you know, way of farming, you know, with nothing else there, like a abyss. It's like, here's the edge of the cliff, like, there you go. But actually saying, okay, like, let's sit down at the table together. Like, there's this motto, you know, nothing about us without us. So you can't make decisions about me or my community without involving me and my community.
Yeah.
Right. That seems pretty straightforward, in a democracy, in a republic, in any sort of government where you have some sort of self-sovereignty, right? Because it's like, no, I didn't agree to that, so I'm not going to go along with that. How can you make a decision about me without asking me what my interests are at all? Because this is the same thing of theorists saying, oh yeah, this is what we need to do to our farms, but I've never stepped on a farm in my life. Right? It's the same problem. We're seeing the same thing happen again and again. And so this is why I think we want solutions. We need to talk to farmers and say, like, okay, so here's some of the problems that we've identified. Are you experiencing any of them? Maybe they say no. And we might say, okay, nonetheless, like, what would work? Like, what would work for you? What do you propose? Rather than sort of imposing things that are they're almost like designed to create backlash. Because let's be honest, backlash right now is one of the biggest problems facing us, with all this polarization. It's like, oh, you guys are going to do this, then we're going to do the opposite. It's like
huge,
real, primary school stuff of like, it's opposite day, and what you say yes, it means no, and like, it's really, really immature. But this is what happens when you feel threatened, existentially threatened, and boy, there are a lot of good excuses to be existentially threatened right now, whether it's catastrophic AI or other arms races, or tech billionaires, or authoritarian governments, or you name the boogeyman. Like, there's plenty of boogie people going around to blame things on, and to blame also bad behavior. States of emergency, where we say, okay, rule of law, democracy is canceled because this threat is just too big. We trust us, we'll take care of it. It's a type of paternalism, really. And as much, back in the 60s and 70s, a lot of environmental thinkers, they're saying, guys, we got to get a handle on this whole environment thing, this pollution, these toxins. Because like, if we go too far down this rabbit hole, people are going to start wanting like authoritarian governments that say, we're going to fix this right now because otherwise it's going to threaten us all.
Yeah.
And, we've already seen this in Europe, like some of these ecological parties, which are very authoritarian. They're saying, we're just going to do this our way, not consult anybody. And I get the impulse, but I really think that it's self-undermining. I mean, it just makes things worse. It creates more backlash. It creates more gridlock, and it doesn't actually achieve the thing that it's trying to achieve.
Well said. Yep.
So it's complicated.
So some of my journey in permaculture, teaching, doing plant walks, and sharing and connecting with people, like I learn more on a plant walk than I imagine the students do, if that makes sense. Like, they'll tell me some story about their grandma and what they did with it. I'll remember that. They might like walk away remembering that was cool. That guy knew a bunch of plants. But I learn, sure. I'm learning things from students constantly. I feel like listening is like such a, clutch thing in that. And I've heard so many doomsday prepper theories along the way from so many different angles, and like, people give their historical background, why they think this or that'll happen. And I've had to cultivate into myself an attitude of a Hopesday prepper, and it's a lot harder. It's a lot harder than getting a list of canned goods and ammo and building a bunker or something, It's like you're creating things not knowing what the future is going to be like. And you're trying to look at the present moment, not knowing exactly what the past was like. You're looking into it, and I keep coming back. I'm going to come right back into the biosemiosis. Like, me having put myself into this nature study of myself, involved in it. Like, I was doing things when I was in my early 20s. Like, I ate a raw food diet for 3.5 years. And was, yeah, of course, eating some tropical fruits from the grocery store, but I was into foraging already, so I was every day eating something local, and that like intention was there, and that like I noticed friends having dreams about tropical places who were raw foodists who were only eating from the grocery store, right? And I was fascinated by that observation, and just like how it's all so connected. There's so much connection in there, and like I can see how you're like, we're in this modern time that where we have the ability to think about and process all these doomsday potentials that could come from different things that we've learned, but then you're able to go out and walk with your chickens and take a deep breath and enjoy that present moment and be like, well, right now, like this like little simple space, like the word I see come up a lot in the Biosemiotic journal, Umwelt, like you're in your Umwelt, you're like realizing your personal experience and letting go of it all for a moment and just like being in your little microcosm or whatever, but you're still you're aware, and there's some part of you that's at peace with all of it because you are aware of what you're aware of. And there's some really fun, I guess, like transition points I've had with some of those kinds of thoughts, to develop that attitude of a Hopesday Prepper. There's comical ones, I have a huge sense of humor. I think it's one of my survival tactics, as well as dancing to stay fit. Dancing and hiking, I feel like have been my most consistent ones to keep the form, like on a regular. But there's things like that have been like mind-blowing to me, like somebody questioned taxonomy to me, and having an ecology background, studying plants and wanting to know their different names and how easy it is to communicate with people. Like I can communicate, in Urtica dioica, and somebody in Spain can tell me what their Spanish name for it is, and all the
in Japanese they still use the Latin names, so yeah.
So it's a wonderful way to communicate. But then I got into like, are you familiar with like Elliot Cowan's plant spirit medicine? Like he wrote these books back in the day about, sending people Mullen spirit and whatnot. And from what I understand, kind of had like I don't know, the Umwelt concept helped me with a question I always had, like, does it matter which Mullen you're sending? Is it this one over here? Is it one in Connecticut? Is it one, like which, like, is it like he had always kind of talked about each species having like their own like spirit. So then that got me thinking about like the human spirit, like what is that, and, like the human animal, like with that immersiveness into nature, and this moment where I let go, even as a scientist, to all the plants having taxonomical names, and even like the way that it's structured and broken, it breaks it apart and divides it. It's similar to me when I take my glasses off. There's this Claude Monet experience where there's like sharp lines in between things are blurred, and it all kind of becomes one. And it almost feels, honestly, I spend hours out in the forest like that, and it's a whole different experience. I get close with moss because I can see it all up sharp, and can see the little tiny fairy wands coming out with the dewdrops on top, and complete detail. But then I can zoom back out, and there's this like my audio experience. I'm listening like so differently than when I have my glasses on, and creating the world around me through my senses and picking up the signs, like the soil, like it feels moist here. Okay, I'm in this lower area now, and can navigate really well with that. But yeah, just like I'm curious about like some of your Umwelt, in that, how you manage some of this anxiety in this modern world. I have felt a lot of anxiety, in communication with comrades and community and friends, and listen to a lot of things. I even have a whole spiel about the leaders of the world are only leaders if you follow them. Like I don't want to hear about these like rich elite guys anymore. I'm aware of them. I have a whole closet full of memes if you want me to dump them on you. It's like I'm ready to but our energy, you know, in the present moment is so precious. And to me, that's what helps me cultivate a Hopesday Prepper, even when I'm out and my feet are getting cold and I'm like making sure my goat's bucket of water is not frozen, you know, or whatever it is, you know, there's hardships in life. We've talked about that in this. And, you know, so I'm curious though, you know, like what your Umwelt is, you know, like some of your feels on how you deal with that anxiety. You feel like, you know, you're actively thinking and being aware of it, but carry a, you know, ability to go into that space of peace.
Yeah, thanks for that. So, you know, like you mentioned, with taking off your glasses, the other senses become more heightened. There is no sort of like one way of seeing the world, and that's sort of what Umwelt Theory is all about, and that there may exist this reality out there, but none of us are seeing that, and we never will. And that's not something that science can bring us or religion. It's part of our Bauplan, according to Jakob von Uxküll, who we get this term Umwelt from. It's part of how we're made as a species. So every species, you know, if you look at a flower through bee eyes, you're seeing, you know, yellow, blue, and ultraviolet, right? So you're actually seeing a landing pad. It creates concentric circles of in the pollen on the actual flower. So it looks completely different through bee eyes or through another insect pollinator's eyes or hummingbird eyes than it looks to us. And yet we find the same flower beautiful. We find the same aroma pleasant that the bee does. But what we're looking at, what we're smelling, is completely different. So the flower is the same flower, but you know, the question is like, it's a happy coincidence or serendipity that it happens to be so pleasurable to us because it was not created for us. And yet we feel that it is. And so there's this interesting multi-species selection that's going on for the flower, for a lot of these fruits, for a lot of life. We're always becoming according to all of the perception of all the beings that are interacting with us as a species and as individuals, right? That's why we also talk about, you know, there are exemplary like members of a species, right? They're animal geniuses. There's an exemplar of an orchid that's so much beyond any others of its same species that we're like, wow, what is going on here? Is this a new species? And yet, you know, Charles Darwin knew that there's no such thing as species or variety or any of these other clades, that they are, like when you take your glasses off, they're blurry lines. They're, you know, these sharp distinctions are only in the mind. They're only in symbolic thought. And so our categories and taxonomies that Linnaeus gave us are very useful. And yet, you know, I have a PhD student in Colombia working with ayahuasca. And he was looking at different taxonomies based on how the plants grow together and how you use them. So how the plants in their medical ethnobotany, how they were used together. So clusters of plants here and clusters there. And that their taxonomies had to do with how the plants lived together in their natural habitats and how we as humans or the indigenous people there, how they interacted with them in concert as like a suite of plants. You know, here's a portfolio of plants here, here's a portfolio there. And so these are very different taxonomies than Linnaeus's. And for me, looking at comparative taxonomies is extremely interesting because it shows that the same object, you know, in a Buddhist sense, is empty. It doesn't have a natural kind. You can't carve nature at its joints because everybody's going to say, well, the joints are here. and someone else says the joint is there, and we're going to have different ideas of where the joints of nature to carve are.
Right.
It doesn't mean that we need to hit each other upside the head with, frozen goat water pails. Instead, we can say, oh, wow, you're seeing things differently. Maybe you're seeing something that I can't see. And so it's this curiosity, which I think is one of the chief virtues of our time, which we need more than anything, which I think is itself an antidote to anxiety. Because when we are curious about things, why are people so obsessed with these icons or with these people? Like, that's so interesting. That doesn't mean that I need to spend my life being obsessed with them or that I even need to do more research. But instead of the yuck yum craving and aversion towards that, can be like, wow, we are, watching this movie, and that's like consuming a lot of our lives. And wow, that feels really overwhelming to me. I think I'm going to go in the other direction.
Yeah.
And so it's the orientation and response to the observations rather than the observations themselves. It's like discernment without discrimination, observation without the judgment that comes with it. And it's not something that comes easy to me naturally. It's something I've had to cultivate, and thankfully had others who have helped me, sometimes by hitting me upside the head with the frozen goat water pail, help me to realize that I was just making myself miserable for no reason. And because, we have our circle of the circle of things that we can affect, right? The circle of our action, but then we have our circle of concern. And symbolic media, mass media, the internet has made it so that we're concerned about all this stuff that we have absolutely, it's not really in our Umwelt at all. It's just in this virtual Umwelt. And there's no way that I can affect it. I can't affect, the war in Palestine, the war in Ukraine. There's just nothing I can do there, personally. And that doesn't mean that like I just ignore it and I live in bliss. There's this paradox of looking at the worst of our reality dead in the eye and not flinching without falling into doomerism or despair, while having faith and hope for the future without falling into false hope or over optimism. And it's holding that faith and unflinching sort of like Kali-like energy, like, the Indian god, who she, cuts off the heads of men like she's afraid of nothing. Yeah. So having this fearlessness to look at what's going on, what's the problem, while also saying, I have faith that, every day, every breath, until I'm gone, I'm just going to do my best today. And that's, all that one can do, really. And that's part of what having faith for me means is to know that, we are living in a world that's wacky, where, there's the threats, so many threats above our head all the time. Nuclear war, AI, these wars, this sort of government, people are taking our freedoms, whatever it is, like angry people. Yeah, angry people with, as E.O. Wilson says, we have, Stone Age emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technologies. And that's a bad combo. We need to upgrade our emotions, upgrade our institutions, and cool it on the new technologies until we get a handle on our emotions and our institutions. And I couldn't agree more with that, that what he says there. The same time,
I'm right there with you. I'm always saying, like for every like $5 billion that went to robotics, like they invested maybe $12 to permaculture.
Totally, or to education, or to clean water.
That's what I'm talking about, I guess, like in a nutshell, I guess. I mean, like permaculture for me is kind of like what is permaculture really? I keep going back to that. It's like, in a nutshell, it's kind of a design system, but really it's kind of a way of observing and interacting And that can go into so many realms beyond the garden, for sure. A lot of times it goes back to food because there hasn't been too many cultures that have sustained in any way without food. And, it's a big part of culture. We like to eat food.
Pretty basic. And it's also, the focus of our rituals and our coming together, our ceremonies have to do typically around
sharing
equinoxes, which have to do with, are you getting enough to eat in the winter solstice? Spring equinox, all right, we can start planting, doing things. Summer, you have everything. And, the fall equinox is the harvest season. That's the abundance. Most cultures, have the spring equinox actually as their new year. So it's, right around that time.
I even read recently on the Gregorian calendars and whatnot, I don't know if I'm using the right words, but the Roman time frames or whatever that make a 2025 now, is that they changed the new year, I think sometime in the early 1500s, from April 1st to January 1st. And that's why April Fools comes off of that, because they created a campaign that anybody that still celebrated on the 1st of April was considered a fool.
Wow. Yeah, I'm not surprised.
It's like there's so many opposite day things,
right? When you ridicule people, a social animal like ourselves, that's the fastest way to get us to drop our customs, even if it made sense. And even if the new thing makes no sense, if you ridicule people enough, they'll say, okay, leave me alone. I'll adopt your custom. Propaganda is not a new invention. It's just been weaponized by the technologies we have.
Right.
For me, permaculture also is wrapped up with how do we get past this? Even if it's very much embedded in all of us, how do we find ways to see little peaks of sunlight, through this tapestry, this black, cloak that's been put over, our eyes, in terms of following natural rhythms that aren't arbitrary, right? That's, for me, a lot of my work in biosemiotics focuses on how arbitrary most of the things that we're attending to are, and how the more we attend to those arbitrary things, it's like a black hole. You're just going to get sucked in, and there it goes. But when you attend to gardens and farms, and, I don't even, to be honest, like the idea or the framing of gardens and farms. I like the idea of, we had these commons in Europe. You had, before there were gardens and farms, you had these wild areas, semi-cultivated, like you were saying. You have these edges, these ecotones, where you have grasslands meeting forest. You have, in South America and other places in Asia, you have these jungles that are super abundant, right? Before there was rice planting, there was the abundance of the jungle. And
just gotta know how to see it.
In Peru, you get 300 varieties of potato, at 4,000 meters or 4,000 feet of elevation change over it. So you have, no matter what happens, any blight, it's not going to go very far.
Right. Yeah, you just got to be able to see it. There's so many gifts, your partner's an herbalist. You've probably heard that saying that often the herbs that we need are found growing outside of our door. And, often I share that with people that are new to the plants, and they're like, the dandelions are really, I don't know, it's like a gateway plant for a lot of people who are learning plants, right? 'Cause we all kind of, it's like dandelions. They're so common, and they're next to people all the time. Yeah. They like to go where we go.
They like to grow where we are. Nettles also. Nettle is one of my plants that I just love all the time. And I actually planted it in my own garden because I like it, just having it right outside the door.
So cool.
So,
Yeah, it's kind of, I mean, right outside your door, you know, so that kind of gives you a little screening when you're going out too, if somebody's like...
Oh, absolutely. No, I mean, the plants as energetic guardians and protectors, like rosemary, also lavender, you know, it will keep away mosquitoes. You know, we plant that so to keep the mosquitoes away. So yeah, there are just so many relationships which are so ancient, but also so high tech in ways that we cannot even fathom. That, you know, when we try to create our order, we have to just acknowledge that most of the time we're going to make mistake after mistake after mistake. But occasionally something fits, and it fits maybe awkwardly or diagonally. You're like, oh, how did that even, you know, obliquely? It just sort of works. It went where it wanted, and, you know, or plants will climb or migrate to where they want to go, where the soil is right for them. And yeah, it's such an interesting paradox, like this notion of us placing nature where we think it will be best. And, you know, as somebody who's into rewilding and to, you know, wild places, you know, there's few things that feel better to me than in, you know, a wild place, just filled with life that's screeching and calling, and, you know, all the crickets and, you know, birds and other noises, and just the cacophony of it has this pristine order nonetheless. You know, if you listen for a 24-hour sequence, they take turns, especially, you know, from sundown to sunup. There's a lot of turn taking by the different species, the different, you know, characters out there, and they give space. And it's really nice, you know, to see like how well they're able to just intuit, okay, now is the time for us to fully go at it. You know, I don't know cicadas if you have them around where you're at, but it's like they just screech when they screech and then they shut up.
Yeah,
you know? It's like this wild thing to be around, and when they screech, it opens my ears. I'm a musician, and I feel my ears pop, and it actually allows me to hear better, and it relaxes my ears because the frequency they're at is at some sort of you know, level that it's able to sort of open my ears, and it provides just enough challenge that whatever blockage I had, earwax or, you know, too many loud concerts as a kid, you know, it helps to like me relax into the sonic acoustic ecology of the environment.
Yeah, they kind of almost demand, you know, like the presence of your sense of listening to tune in. And as you know, as seasons progress, you know, I notice it in myself too, like in your homeland, you know, you get used to the sounds, and like at some point you kind of like are just used to them, and then all of a sudden there's these cold days start coming and you notice they're not there anymore. And those are just like so much feel like from the audio experience around in the world. And, you know, it's something when I travel to other places, I find myself really fascinated often by the sounds, and will again sit somewhere with my glasses off and just listen. Like the first time I heard jungle fowl roosters, you know, like I was in Puerto Rico, like thousands of roosters in the morning. Like people get upset about hearing one in the morning, like thousands of them. Somehow it turns into a very similar place like the cicadas do, where there's like these waves of them in like harmony, and, you know, so they're like different harmonies, like in areas where there's more of them going, and the sound, you know, travels in waves throughout the, you know, the land. It's fascinating, really. And there's houses everywhere too. So meanwhile, there's cars and things going about, you know, doing their thing. And I think that, you know, bringing, you know, that animal aspect, connecting into our communities is like really important for me right now too. And that interspecies connection, is so fascinating. In our cities, there should be more animals. Why not? Like, I mean, there already is a lot of different animals, but our interactions are like roadkill, or like, oh, look, there's nature. And, there's so much
or the
more.
pigeons, the poor pigeons, that they were transmitting our messages for thousands of years, and then we got the telegraph, and we're like, we don't need you anymore. But they're domesticated, so they don't know how to live without us anymore. And we call them like winged rats, but really they were our domesticated animals. And if you go to Cappadocia in Turkey, their droppings created the lushness. Their droppings were seen as gold, and so they created tens of thousands of little pigeon nests out of the rock, so that the pigeons would come roost there and give their manure to their pistachio and apricot fields, where they'd have the tastiest apricots and pistachios because of that. And so we've been living in symbiosis with these various animals without them without domesticating them in a strict sense. They weren't our workhorses or work animals. We were seducing them into doing their thing, and in doing their thing they brought great abundance to us. And I think that is not only an ethical relationship, but it's way more fun. I mean, think about
so much more.
If you like somebody, right, you don't want to be able to control them, because if you can force them to say I love you, they don't really mean it. Right? You really want them to come to that I love you on their own, completely unforced, because then the meaning for it, the impact is unworldly. It's something completely else. And that's how I try to think about like my ideal relationships with nature. Is how I would court the object of my affection, through wooing. Not through control, not through demanding, not through caging, even if it's a golden cage. Like, I don't want that, because I wouldn't want to be the type of person who lives with somebody in those conditions.
Right.
What would that make me, Like, what sort of person am I if I can't even get love, even if I try to, like, wring it out of somebody? Like, that would be the worst feeling in the world for me. That would be creating my own hell.
Yeah, just even there's so much in the poetics of that, but I can feel that hell that people are going through. There's so many people hurting and, suffering in all the different ways. And, that's a feel.
Well, I grew up with a very controlling father, and, in a family where control was a big thing. And I was like, fuck all this shit. I just, that's not, doesn't work for me. And it doesn't work for me. I don't think it works for anybody. Maybe it does, but like in the end, it drove me to ask these questions of like, okay, so how do I cultivate relationships where I can just allow, without having to do anything, without having to prove myself, without, all the anxiety and consternation of spinning the plates or proving, just being humble and simple, and living a life where I try to help out where I can, and I try to listen where possible, and I try to just be part of going where I'm needed, and it's a very different life from here's my plan, I'm going to go do this, go do that, go do the other thing. Most of my life has been serendipity.
Love that.
I wouldn't call it random, but like the best things in life were complete surprises. They were better beyond my wildest dreams, because I didn't even have the frame of reference to know like how sweet things could be. And letting them come to me rather than chasing them has been one of the great and continual lessons of my life.
But I think that, I appreciate you being here. Again, I don't feel like this is random. This has been some serendipity. I've been recently called an outreacher by a couple of people, and I thought that was cool, you know, and they gave me gratitude for maintaining friendships with them over decades, and that probably wouldn't have happened if I wouldn't have been the one calling them up like once every 2 years, like, hey, you still alive? What's going on? You know what I mean? It's like, but there's I think in my balances right now, I'm trying to balance continually, like, I don't know, the biological intelligence and the AI intelligence, you know. And I feel that, you know, similar to back when I was in high school and they were telling us about the internet, you know, just some era realm ideas for you where I'm at. There was, you know, not that much interest in me. I went to a natural resource school where all the classes were outside, hands-on in the woods, like right out of high school, where I'd say 95% of the people I graduated high school with went to some sort of like software, IT, or, you know, like really like put a lot of their work career life into computers and things like that. To me, the way I thought about it was like, well, if they're all going to go do that, it makes more sense for me to follow this path that, you know, I was, of course, interested in computers like a lot of young people at the time. But I don't know, like I felt like it's like if everybody knows how to change tires, but nobody knows how to like drive a car, the car's not going to be any good. You know what I mean? There's something there to it that, I don't know, I felt like everybody was learning how to change the tires or learning how to change the brakes, but there was, you know, finding that balance for me of the biological intelligence in this like zeros and ones world. You know, it's this, I feel like there was more than just myself that wanted to reach out and connect with you after reading some of your writings. And, you know, it's serendipity that we've connected, and there is a real connection here. You know, we did initially connect with zeros and ones on a paper trail, but perhaps we've been talking and developing some of these like philosophies and concepts with each other in this biological matrix, you know, these images that we get inside of our heads, you know, these like thought streams that pop in, you know, and I appreciate being on this earth at the same time as you, and that we can connect and share in these growths. And
yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah, I mean, I don't, you know, disparage, you know, the ability for us to connect, over, you know, thousands and thousands of miles here through these technologies. They're super useful, and you know, I do think that there's a balance. You know, when one is cultivating that receptivity, it doesn't mean that it's just all yin, right? Like not at all. I mean, I go out and make shit happen, but I go out and make shit happen according to updating in real time, listening, smelling, you know, the wind, you know, understanding, like if I'm like, oh, that's not working, then I pivot, right? I recently heard this really beautiful saying that impacted me. It's like, you know, go slow enough that you can pivot without getting whiplash.
I love that.
And that felt like my level, right? So like, you know, you're cruising along, whatever, and, you know, connecting and reaching out, which is a beautiful thing, right? Reaching out a tendril, right? Just like those ferns that you probably drew behind you, right? Yeah. And plants are really good at going slow enough that they can pivot without getting whiplash. And I find this to be really necessary for us in this age where everything's telling us we have to go faster, we have to prove ourselves more, we have to break ourselves in order to keep up with the Joneses. And for me, like, slowing down actually brings me more power, because what I do goes deeper. And I have a big sort of problem trying to do too many things, trying to go too fast. So this is a constant reminder to me. And sometimes the universe just reminds me, you know, I'm going too fast. It just, you know, slaps me across the face. I get that.
Set the metronome.
But, you know, the way of the plant, of connecting, of feeling things out, everything's always like tentative. It's like, I haven't made up my mind yet. It's whole life. Like, they're still figuring it out. And still connecting, and still like there's options, because there's so much community, so much interconnectedness, and so much attention to the present moment. And so that's why, in a way, I'm a plant philosopher, because I understand the wisdom of that, even if I'm not always able to, anchor it or instantiate it in my life. It's still always, guiding me, keeping me rooted.
Yeah. I always say that's like the square root of a mint plant, It's like right in there. So I love that, plant philosopher. I want to call myself that, like I philosophize on plants and all the realms of it. Mm-hmm. I love that concept. I love your background in philosophy. I feel that it helps you articulate and like communicate about a lot of things that you've had thoughts and feels about, and other people have too. It's like that, I don't know, like the bow and arrow, nobody knows where it was invented, but like it kind of showed up all over the planet in similar time periods. And there's it is so cool that we can connect. I appreciate you and thank you so much. I want to respect our time. It's been a couple hours. I got a little bit more time. I'm moving slow.
I probably should get to dinner at this point. Cool. But I really appreciate, Andy, you reaching out, and may we contribute our little bit to this collective flourishing, so that we can live on heaven on earth in this paradise, which is provided for us. So
thank you, appreciate it. And again, wake the farm up, maintaining crown. Appreciate you guys for listening in. And I like to maintain ground. I'd be for real, and hopefully we'll catch up with Yogi again someday, and go into some other topics. I know this guy's complex. I mean, he shared with us in here that he plays music too. None of you heard me jump on him on that, but I'm really curious about that, and that could be a whole nother 2-hour jam session. Just who knows.
I think is that piano you got right behind you?
Yeah, here we go.
There you go. Nice.
And then there's a little drum set back here too. And I don't know, I like playing music. It's I have always kept it in my playful realm though, and honestly don't know how to read music. So more recently, just openly I'm calling myself a sound artist or something,
Mm-hmm.
I like the rhythms of birds, all the different things.
Totally.
But yeah, your music, curious about that. You have it. Is there any available on the internet?
Yeah, I can send you some for sure.
Awesome. Look forward to that. Appreciate you so much. I'll let you get to dinner. I'm gonna go have breakfast here.
Go in.
All right,
brother.
Awesome. Awesome. Wake the farm up.